The clinking of silverware was the only sound filling the silence between us. Wednesday nights used to be our little tradition: pasta, wine, and soft music in the background. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I sat across from Elijah, my husband of 6 years, watching him as he kept his eyes down, avoiding mine, shoveling spaghetti into his mouth like it was some sort of race. I tried to find something, anything, in his face that reminded me of the man I married. But he was just gone. Somewhere else. My eyes drifted to the glowing phone on the table beside his plate. A notification flashed again, the screen lighting up like a warning sign. I knew I should not look. I had told myself over and over not to become that kind of wife. But something in my gut told me that I had to know. He did not even notice when I reached over and tapped in his passcode. His acting had become that convincing. And then I saw it. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Meet at our place in an hour. The name above the message, Celeste. I read it twice, then again. The words sliced through me like glass. It explained everything: why he had been so distant, why he came home late, distracted, checked out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. I slid his phone across the table slowly, my hand trembling. That was when he looked up, finally seeing me. "Everything okay, Harper?" he asked with that calm, practiced tone that he had probably used 1,000 times before, on me, on her. Maybe on others too. I did not say a word. I just stared. He glanced down, saw the phone. The blood drained from his face. "Harper, I can explain." I held up a hand to stop him. My voice came out hollow, cracking under the weight of betrayal. "Don't. Just tell me how long this has been going on." He opened his mouth, closed it. His shoulders dropped like the lie was finally too heavy to carry. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months. Half a year of him lying next to me, kissing me goodnight, telling me he loved me, while he was sneaking around behind my back. I stood up. My chair scraped hard against the floor, but I barely heard it. I grabbed my purse. "Where are you going?" he asked, suddenly alarmed, like he was only just beginning to understand what he had done. I turned to look at him, eyes full of everything I could not say. "I am leaving," I said, my voice low but firm. "And when I come back, you better be gone, because I do not even recognize you anymore." I walked out into the cold night, the air biting at my skin, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I had no idea what tomorrow would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. The hotel room was too quiet. The walls felt like they were pressing in on me, echoing every heartbeat, every shaky breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat, staring blankly at the carpet, as if it could somehow absorb the pain clawing at my chest. I had left my home behind, the man I thought I knew, the life I had built for 6 long years, and all I had now was the growing realization that I had never really known Elijah at all. I cried. Not the loud, dramatic kind. Just silent tears streaming down my cheeks as I gripped a throw pillow to my chest like it might keep me from unraveling completely. I stayed like that for hours, unable to sleep, unable to even close my eyes without seeing that message again. "Can't wait to feel you inside me again." It repeated in my head like a sick lullaby. By morning, the devastation was still there, but something else had taken root too. A flicker of something sharper. Something colder. I wasn't going to just fall apart and let Elijah walk away untouched. No, if he had turned our marriage into a lie, I was going to uncover just how deep that lie went. I texted Kendra, a friend who had gone through a nasty divorce the year before. She wasted no time. "You need to talk to someone. I'll send you the number," she wrote. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from a man named Mitchell Dean in a small, nondescript office on the east side of the city. He didn't have the look of a traditional private investigator, no trench coat or dramatic flair. Just calm eyes, a notepad, and the air of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. I handed him Elijah's full name, some recent details, and the one message from Celeste that had detonated my world. "I want to know everything," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Everywhere he's been. Every woman. Every lie." He nodded. "Give me 24 hours." I barely made it through that day, pacing around the hotel room, unable to eat, checking my phone every 5 minutes. The next evening, Mitchell called. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. He wasn't wrong. He laid everything out on the table in front of me, literal folders filled with emails, credit card charges, hotel receipts, and photos. Elijah hadn't just been unfaithful with Celeste. There were at least 3 others. Names I didn't recognize, faces I didn't want to, timestamps that overlapped with the nights he told me he was working late or stuck in traffic. But what shattered me more than anything was the financial trail. Elijah had been siphoning money from our joint accounts, transferring it into a hidden fund. Thousands of dollars spent on hotels, jewelry, dinners, and even rent for an upscale apartment. Celeste, Mitchell said, flipping to one final page. She's not just a fling. He's been supporting her. Full-time. My throat tightened. The betrayal was so much bigger than I imagined. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had built an entire life with our money for someone else. I should have turned around. Halfway to the address Mitchell gave me, my hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel, I could barely feel my fingers. Every red light felt like a test, asking me if I really wanted to go through with this. But I did. More than anything, I needed to see the woman who helped torch my marriage with her perfectly manicured hands and honey-lace lies. Marcella, or Celeste, as she called herself when she texted my husband, lived in a sleek, high-rise complex in a part of town I could never afford on my own. I parked outside and used the temporary code Mitchell had acquired from his last visit. The security system chirped softly as I entered the building. Her apartment was on the 11th floor. The hallway smelled like fresh flowers and overpriced candles. My heart was pounding as I stood at her door. I don't know what I expected, screaming, crying, guilt, but what I found was worse. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, and immediately, I was hit with the scent of perfume and designer air freshener. The place was extravagant. Open-concept kitchen, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that looked like it had been plucked out of a luxury magazine. My stomach twisted knowing our money had paid for this. "Is that you, Eli?" A voice called out from the other room, light, sugary, and grating. She appeared in the doorway wearing nothing but a silky white robe that clung to her like a second skin. Her long dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her lips curled into a smirk the second she saw me. Well, if it isn't the infamous Mrs. Callahan," she purred. "I was wondering when you'd come knocking." The nerve of her. The smugness. It boiled every ounce of grief inside me into pure rage. "You're the one who destroyed my marriage," I said through clenched teeth, my voice shaking with fury. She tilted her head, unfazed. "Please." "Your marriage was already rotting. I just gave it a little push." That was it. My hand moved before my brain did. The slap cracked across her face so loudly, even I flinched. She gasped, stumbling backward, one hand flying to her cheek. "You crazy. Don't even try me," I snapped, stepping closer. "He lied. He cheated. But you knew. And you didn't care. You used him." She recovered quickly, her lips curling again. "Used him? Sweetheart, I upgraded him. Gave him a reason to breathe again." I laughed bitterly. "No, you drained him dry. Emotionally, financially. You bled him for everything you could." Her smug look faltered for just a second. "I know about the apartment, the gifts, the money," I continued. "Every cent came from our accounts. You've been living large on what I helped build." She crossed her arms. "Well, maybe you should have kept him happy." I took a step back, disgusted. "He's broke, Celeste. Or he will be soon. And when that money stops, I wonder how long you'll stick around." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over." "No," I said, already heading for the door. "It's just beginning." I walked back into the house, like a storm waiting to explode. Elijah was already home, pretending to live a normal life, as if I had not just seen his mistress half-naked in the apartment our money paid for. He looked up from the kitchen counter, startled. "Harper? Where were you?" I didn't answer. I dumped the manila envelope Mitchell had handed me right onto the marble countertop. Pages spilled out. Photos, receipts, screenshots, and emails, all of it. The life he had been living behind my back, right there in black and white. His eyes darted down, then widened. "Elijah," I said, my voice cold and calm. "You haven't just been cheating. You've been financing a whole secret life. With our money." He started flipping through the pages, his face draining. The photos of hotel lobbies. The receipts for jewelry. The wire transfers. One after the other like a hammer on his conscience. "Are you serious right now?" He finally spat, his voice sharp with accusation. "You went behind my back and hired a PI?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Behind your back? Elijah, you've been sneaking around with half the city. Don't talk to me about betrayal." He slammed the papers down. "You know what? You want to play the victim, fine. But maybe if you hadn't turned into some nagging ice queen, I wouldn't have needed someone else." I stared at him, stunned. He was actually flipping this on me. "You needed someone else?" I repeated slowly, fury rising up my spine. "You destroyed our marriage, Elijah. Not me. You made the choice to cheat, to steal. Don't you dare act like this is something I caused." He stood taller, face hardening. "Well, you don't have to worry anymore. I already contacted a lawyer. I want a divorce." The words hit like a punch to the chest. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I just breathed. Numb. Then nodded. "Perfect," I said. "Let's make it official." He looked thrown off by how calm I was. He expected me to beg, scream, collapse. But that version of me? She didn't exist anymore. Later that night, while gathering my things from the study, I found it, tucked inside a dusty folder marked with my father's handwriting. The deed to the house. Signed solely under my name. Years ago, my father had insisted on it, said it was to protect me. I thought he was just being his usual cynical self. But now, I could have kissed him for it. This house was mine. Everything else? Elijah could fight me for it. But I had leverage, truth, and now, fire in my veins. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and watched him sleep on the couch, as if nothing had happened. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to wait for closure. He wanted a war? Good. Because I was going to bury him in it. By the next morning, I was sitting across from Diane Hastings, a woman who wore her power like a perfectly tailored blazer and had a voice sharp enough to draw blood without raising its pitch. Her office overlooked the city skyline, but all I could see were the walls of my broken marriage closing in behind me. I slid the entire PI dossier across the desk. "Elijah Callahan," I said quietly. "Serial cheater. Financial manipulator. I want to take him for everything." Diane flipped through the evidence with methodical precision. Her brow arched as she took in the credit card statements, hotel receipts, and photos of Elijah wrapped around one woman after another. Then she paused on the apartment rental and transactions linked to Celeste, real name, Marcela Ruiz. "Good God," she muttered, removing her glasses. "He wasn't just unfaithful. He was running a second life on your dime." "Exactly," I said. "I want to freeze his assets. Hit him where it hurts. And I want aggressive alimony. I gave him the best years of my life. He gave me lies." Diane smiled, just a hint of teeth. "With this kind of documentation, he won't know what hit him." Over the next week, we built a war plan. Diane filed motions to lock down Elijah's accounts before he could drain them dry. She prepared a scorched earth alimony request based on not just the betrayal, but the sheer financial recklessness of it all. And then came Marcela. Diane tapped her perfectly polished nail against the page that outlined the luxury apartment and spending tied directly to Elijah. "This woman isn't just a mistress," she said. "She's a parasite. And if we can prove she knowingly exploited your husband for money, especially marital assets, we can go after her too." My heart skipped. "You're saying we can take her to court? If she benefited financially from this affair, and she did, we can pursue her personal assets. Her business. Her car. Anything bought with your money." The thought of her smug little face twisting into panic brought a flicker of satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. Just when I thought the plan couldn't get any more layered, Mitchell, the PI, called with an update that made my stomach drop. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Marcella's seeing someone else. Has been for a while." "What?" I asked, gripping my phone tighter. "Older guy.
Rich.
Married. His name's Christopher Woodrow. Owns a chain of private investment firms. Billionaire, with a capital B." My eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" "I've got pictures. She visits his penthouse twice a week. Stays overnight sometimes. Same routine." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped my lips. So that's who she really was. Not some tortured lover caught in a messy romance, just a chameleon slipping into any man's life who could bankroll her fantasy. "Elijah has no idea, does he?" I asked. "Not a clue." I hung up, my mind already racing. Marcella wasn't just a mistress. She was a professional, and I was going to make sure her entire house of cards collapsed right on top of her designer heels. The chandeliers sparkled above us, casting golden light over polished marble floors and rows of champagne glasses. The annual Westbridge Charity Gala was the city's most coveted event, where reputations were polished and fortunes flaunted. It was also where I would burn two of them to the ground. I stood near the entrance in a sleek black dress, Diane at my side, both of us poised like hunters watching the first twitch of prey. Across the ballroom, Marcella was draped over Elijah's arm like a couture accessory. Her crimson dress clung to her curves like it had been stitched directly onto her body. She laughed loudly, flashing that same smug smile I'd seen in her apartment. Elijah looked proud, deluded, even. The two of them looked like a power couple. And in just a few minutes, they would become a cautionary tale. Diane's assistant, a sharp young woman named Bailey, wove through the crowd like a whisper. Hidden in her clutch were printed stills and flash drives loaded with surveillance footage of Marcella with her other lover, Christopher Woodrow. They weren't subtle images either. One showed her locking lips with the billionaire in the backseat of a town car. Another, far worse, was taken inside his penthouse elevator with Marcella's legs wrapped around him. All time-stamped. All damning. It didn't take long. First came the whispers, soft, confused murmurs from the corner, where Bailey had handed a flash drive to a tech-savvy hedge fund heir. Within minutes, iPhones were lighting up all over the room.
Gasps.
Murmured, "Oh my gods." People pointing. Heads turning toward the couple in red and black at the center of it all. Marcella stiffened, her laugh faltering as she looked around. Elijah leaned in, confused. Someone showed him a phone. His face drained of color. And then, like a scene ripped straight out of a fever dream, the crowd parted. Miranda Woodrow, elegant, terrifying, and dressed in floor-length emerald, marched toward Marcella with the fury of a woman scorned and unafraid of an audience. "You little snake," Miranda hissed, her diamond earrings catching alight as she closed the distance. "Did you really think you could humiliate me in front of my friends? My children?" Marcella's lips parted in panic. "Miranda,
She didn't finish.
Miranda's perfectly manicured hand clutched the front of Marcella's expensive dress and yanked hard. The fabric tore in one brutal rip, sending red sequins scattering across the floor. The crowd gasped as Marcella shrieked, clutching what remained of her dignity to her chest. "Let's see how many billionaires want you now." Miranda spat before security rushed in to pull her away. Elijah stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold around him. His wide eyes met mine from across the ballroom. And in that moment, I saw it, the dawning horror. The realization that the woman he sacrificed everything for was nothing more than a well-dressed grifter. He looked away first. I stayed rooted in place, champagne in hand, as the ballroom buzzed with scandal and satisfaction curled in my chest like a warm flame. Checkmate. The courtroom was packed, though no one spoke above a whisper. The tension crackled like static as Elijah sat beside his lawyer, looking like a man unraveling at the seams. His tie was crooked, his face pale, his hands fidgeting under the table like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I sat across the aisle, my spine straight, Diane Hastings beside me, calm, poised, lethal in a navy suit and blood-red heels. She stood and began laying out our case with surgical precision, her voice smooth as glass but twice as sharp. "Your Honor," she began, placing a thick binder on the table with a heavy thud, "we are not here to debate emotional grievances. We are here to present undeniable evidence of infidelity, financial deception, and the gross misuse of marital assets by Mr. Callahan." One by one, she presented the receipts. Hotel bookings in other cities. Jewelry purchases charged to our joint card. Money funneled into a secret account, then used to pay for the apartment of one Marcela Ruiz. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. I needed the court to see that I was no longer the wounded wife. I was a woman reclaiming everything I had lost. The judge raised his brows. Elijah's lawyer fumbled a few objections, but Diane crushed each one with precedent and precision. When she finally rested our case, the silence was deafening. You could practically hear Elijah's reputation shattering into pieces. His lawyer barely managed to stammer a defense, something about emotional neglect and a lonely man's bad decisions. No one was convinced, not even the judge. When court adjourned for the day, I stood, gathering my things calmly. But before I could leave, Elijah caught up to me in the hallway, his face red, his voice desperate. "Harper," he said, breathless, like he had just run a marathon. "Please, just talk to me." I turned slowly, my gaze cool. "What could you possibly say, Elijah?" His eyes flickered. I was stupid. I was angry. I thought Marcela, he choked on her name. I thought she cared. But she's gone. She left me. I tilted my head. Shocking. "Everything's falling apart," he said, his voice cracking. "I lost my job. I can't show my face at any client event. And now," he looked down the hallway, toward the courtroom doors. "You're going to take everything." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. He wanted sympathy, redemption, a chance to explain the unexplainable. "You brought this on yourself," I said finally, my voice low. "You tore our marriage apart piece by piece. You chose this. All of it." His mouth opened, then closed. For a second, I thought he might argue. But all the arrogance had drained out of him. "And Marcela?" added with a dry smile. "Guess it turns out homewreckers don't stick around when the roof caves in." He looked away. I left him there, standing in the courthouse lobby like a man who had just realized the price of everything he'd gambled and lost. And I walked out into the sunlight, knowing I had only just begun to take my life back. He showed up at Diane's office 2 weeks later, looking nothing like the man I had married. The confidence was gone. The ego had crumbled. Elijah Callahan now looked like a man who had stared into the consequences of his own choices and flinched. He sat across from me at the long oak table, wringing his hands. Diane stood quietly in the corner, arms crossed, ready to intervene if needed. But I had already decided this part. I wanted to hear whatever pathetic excuse he had prepared before I shut the door for good. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice low. 1,000 mistakes. I said nothing. "I lost everything," he continued, barely able to look me in the eye. "Marcela's gone. Took what she could and disappeared. My clients won't return my calls. The firm asked me to resign. I can't even pay rent on my own." Still, I stayed quiet. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his words without the comfort of my response. "I was angry. I blamed you for things that were never your fault," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought chasing someone new would fill whatever I felt was missing. But all it did was destroy everything that mattered. And now I'm just asking for a second chance. Not for the marriage, maybe, but for some kind of peace between us. I don't expect forgiveness, just a way forward." It took everything in me not to laugh. I folded my hands on the table and leaned forward just slightly. "Elijah, I am not here to give you peace. I'm here to give you closure." My voice was steady, sharp. "You're not getting a second chance. Not with me. Not after what you've done." His face crumpled. He looked at Diane, as if hoping she might interject. She didn't move. I pushed the final stack of divorce papers across the table. Every page had been reviewed, every line prepared to favor the woman you betray at your own peril. The house. The savings. The retirement fund. Everything he thought he could quietly walk away with was now mine. "If you sign these now," I said coldly, "you'll be spared a long, ugly courtroom brawl that will only end with you losing even more. But there's one condition." He blinked. "What?" "You leave me alone. Permanently. No calls. No messages. You disappear from my life as completely as I've disappeared from yours." He sat there for a long moment, staring down at the pages that represented the last shreds of the life we had once shared. Then, with a shaky hand, he picked up the pen and signed. When he stood, he didn't look at me. He just whispered, "I hope you find peace, Harper. Real peace." I didn't answer. I watched him walk out the door, his shoulders heavy, his wallet empty, and his pride in pieces. And when the door finally shut behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The weight was gone. The chapter was closed. And for the first time in years, I felt light.
Free.
Reborn. 6 months had passed, and I no longer recognized the woman who once sobbed alone in a hotel room, broken by betrayal. That version of me had been buried with the ashes of my former life. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had clawed her way out of despair and into purpose. Tonight, the ballroom at the Westbridge Hotel shimmered with light and laughter. But this time, it wasn't for scandal or secrets. It was for Alara's light, the foundation I had built from the ruins of my marriage. The very room where Marcella had been publicly destroyed was now the birthplace of something entirely different: healing, strength, and second chances. I stood at the podium, facing a sea of donors, survivors, and supporters. Elegant dresses, sharp suits, and warm smiles filled the space. But it wasn't the wealth that moved me, it was the courage. Every woman here had fought a battle no one else could see. When I lost everything, I began, my voice steady. I thought I would never feel whole again. But I realized I wasn't alone, and neither is anyone else going through the pain of betrayal. A quiet hush swept over the crowd. Alara's light exists to remind women that from devastation, we can rebuild, we can rise, and we do not have to do it alone. Thunderous applause erupted, echoing through the chandeliers, and I let it wash over me, not as validation, but as a promise. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. As the night flowed on and music filled the room, I drifted among guests, thanking them for their support, their presence, their belief. And then, just as I was returning to my table, he appeared. "Mrs. Callahan?" he asked with a British lilt, a gentle smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I turned.
Tall. Polished.
Hazel eyes that didn't just look at me, but into me. "Not anymore," I said with a soft grin. "Just Alara." He extended a hand. "Nigel Douglas. I'm a journalist, mostly covering human interest stories. But tonight, I think I found one worth writing about." I shook his hand, warmth blooming in my chest. "I hope you're a better writer than a flatterer." He laughed, his gaze lingering. "You're not just inspiring, Alara. You're real."
There's power in that.
The kind that changes lives. For the first time in a long while, I felt something stir, something gentle, unfamiliar, but welcome. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't chasing healing through someone else. But maybe, just maybe, something new could begin when I was ready. I stepped out onto the balcony alone for a moment, letting the breeze kiss my skin, the city lights blinking far below. The woman who had been lied to, cheated on, abandoned, she was gone. In her place stood someone reborn. Not a victim, not a wife, but Alara, whole, grounded, and finally, completely free. And for the first time, the future didn't scare me. Because this time, it belonged to me.